The sun of the colony world was setting, casting long purple shadows across the city below, but high up in the crystal spire, the air was perfectly controlled. The temperature was set to a cool 70 degrees, just the way the masters liked it. Chris stood on a metal ladder in the narrow service tunnel behind the main living room wall. He wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm. The service tunnels were always hot, filled with the humming of heavy machines that kept the huge penthouse alive. Chris was a human male. He was not tall, but he was built of solid muscle, with rough hands and dark hair that he kept short. He wore simple gray coveralls with the name Chris stitched on the pocket. In front of him was a massive tangle of pipes and wires. It was the life support system for the penthouse. To the aliens living here, this room was dirty and ugly. To Chris, it was the heart of the home. If he stopped working for even an hour, the air would go bad, and the temperature would rise to dangerous levels. He picked up a heavy wrench. The gravity generator was vibrating too much. It was a delicate piece of technology, made by the Etherians, a race of aliens who looked down on everyone else. They were tall, very thin, and had pale skin that looked like glass. They had big, dark eyes and could move small objects with their minds. But they were physically weak. They did not like to touch things. They did not like to sweat. Chris tightened the bolt on the generator. The vibration stopped. He smiled to himself. It was a simple job, but it required strength. He knew that an Etherian could not have done this. They were too fragile. If they tried to turn this wrench, their thin arms might break. He climbed down the ladder and opened the service hatch. He stepped out into the main living room. The difference was shocking. The service tunnel was dark and hot, but the living room was bright and beautiful. The floor was made of white stone that glowed softly. The walls were clear glass, looking out over the city. Floating in the center of the room was a large, comfortable chair. In that chair sat Illyra. Illyra was the daughter of the house owner. She was young by her people's standards, maybe 50 years old. She wore a long dress made of silver fabric that seemed to float around her even without wind. She was not sitting on the chair, she was hovering just above it, using her mind to stay a few inches in the air. She was looking at a hologram of a star map, tapping the air to change the pictures. She did not look at Chris when he walked out. She did not like to look at the help. To her, humans were useful but not very important. We were like tools. You used a hammer when you needed to hit a nail, then you put it back in the box. The air feels a bit heavy, Illyra said suddenly. Her voice was soft and musical, but it sounded bored. Chris stopped walking. He pulled a small device from his pocket to check the oxygen levels. I just balanced the mix, Miss Illyra. It is at perfect 40%. Well, it feels heavy to me, she said, waving her hand as if she could push the air away. Fix it before my mother comes back. She is very sensitive. Yes, miss, Chris said. He did not argue. He knew the air was fine. She just liked to complain. It made her feel powerful. Chris walked back to the wall panel. He opened the cover and adjusted a dial. He did not actually change anything, but he made a small sound so she would think he did. Sometimes, you had to fix the problem, and sometimes, you just had to fix the feeling. Just then, the front door slid open. A tall, older woman walked in. It was Mara, Illyra's mother. She looked just like her daughter, but with lines on her face and sharper eyes. She wore a dress made of gold threads. She was carrying a small box that floated beside her. Illyra, "Are the decorations ready for the Festival of Lights?" Mara asked. She floated across the room without touching the floor. Her feet were inside the long gold dress. "Yes, mother," Ilora said, finally turning her chair to look at her mother. "The lights are set to turn on tomorrow night." But the human was just making noise with the machines again. Mara looked over at Chris. Her eyes were cold. "Chris," she said. It was not a greeting, it was just a label. "Mistress Mara," Chris said with a nod. He kept his eyes down. It was safer that way. "The festival is a very important time," Mara said sharply. "We will have guests from the High Council. They are very evolved beings. I do not want them to hear banging or clanking while they are eating. Do your work today, and do it quietly. Tomorrow, you must stay in the background. You should not be seen when the guests arrive." "I understand, mistress," Chris said. "I will make sure the gravity stabilizers are silent. I will check the heating coil so the balcony is warm." "Good," Mara said. She turned back to her daughter. "These humans. They are strong, yes. They are good for lifting heavy things and crawling into small holes. But they have no grace. They are so physical. It is messy." Ilora laughed. "I know. Did you see him wiping his face? He was actually sweating. It is so primitive." Chris stood still by the wall. He was used to this. To the Etherians, using your body was a sign of being lower class. They believed that if you had to use your hands, you were not smart enough to use your mind. They did not understand that to fix a machine, you needed both mind and hand. You had to understand how the metal felt, how the heat moved, how the gears turned. He looked at the beautiful room. The floating chairs, the holographic stars, the self-cleaning floor. It was a paradise. But it was a paradise built on wires and pipes. If he left, the paradise would break. "Chris," Mara called out. "Bring us the refreshments. We are thirsty." Chris walked to the kitchen. The kitchen was full of machines that made food and drinks. He pressed a button, and a silver pitcher appeared. He poured a blue liquid into 2 crystal glasses. The liquid was called nectar. It was very expensive. He carefully carried the glasses on a tray back to the main room. He walked softly. He did not want to spill. He set the tray down on a low table next to Mara. She did not say thank you. She just lifted her hand, and one of the glasses floated up into the air and into her hand. "You may go now," she said, waving him away like a fly. "We have plans to discuss." Chris nodded again. "I will go to the upper deck to check the climate shield," he said. He turned and walked toward the elevator. As the doors closed, he heard Ilora giggle. "Mother, look at this dress for the party. It is lighter than air. I won't even have to walk." The elevator took him up to the roof deck. This was the highest point of the spire. The wind was strong here, but the shield kept the air warm and safe. In the center of the deck was a large, clear projector for the light show. It was a complex piece of equipment, older than the rest of the house. Chris put down his tool bag. He looked at the projector. It had a small red light blinking on the side. That meant the power coupling was loose. He had warned them about this last week. If it wasn't fixed, the lights would not work for the party. He opened the side panel. The wires inside were glowing with energy. It was dangerous. An Etherian would never dare to touch this because the energy could burn their sensitive minds. But Chris was not sensitive to energy fields. He just wore thick rubber gloves. He reached in and grabbed the coupling. It was hot. It burned his glove a little, but he held on tight. He pushed it back into place with a loud click. The red light turned green. The machine hummed with a deep, steady sound. He stood up and looked out over the city. Below him, the lights of the colony were twinkling. He saw the ships flying in the distance. He thought about the party tomorrow. Mara and Illyra would wear their beautiful dresses. They would drink their nectar. They would show off their amazing light show. And they would tell their friends how lucky they were to live in such a perfect home. Chris sat down on the edge of the deck. He took a sandwich out of his pocket and started to eat. He was tired. His back hurt from bending over all day. His hands were stained with grease. They did not know that he had spent 3 hours rebuilding the cooling pump under the floor yesterday. They did not know that he had reprogrammed the security codes this morning so that no hackers could get in. They just thought the house worked by magic. Perfect home, Chris said to himself, chewing the bread. Magic house. He knew the truth. The house was a cage of wires, and he was the only one who held the key. Without him, the glass walls would not hold back the cold air. The lights would not turn on. The gravity would fail, and they would all float away into the dark sky. He finished his sandwich and wiped his mouth. He stood up and picked up his tools. He had one more job to do before he could sleep. He had to check the main server room in the basement. It was the brain of the house. If the brain got too hot, it would shut down. Chris walked back to the elevator. He pressed the button for the basement. As he went down, he thought about how small they made him feel. He was not a guest. He was not a friend. He was just part of the machine. But as he looked at his strong, rough hands, he knew something they didn't. Machines break. And when they break, only the strong can fix them. The night was dark inside the walls of the crystal spire. In the main living room, the lights were turned off, and the big glass windows showed only the stars and the distant lights of the city. It was very quiet. But down in the service tunnels, it was not quiet. Here, the machines never slept. Chris was lying on his back inside a narrow metal tunnel. Above him, hot pipes ran the length of the wall. He was holding a heavy flashlight in his mouth, and his hands were busy with the thermal coupling. This was a small device that connected the heating system to the water pipes. It had broken earlier in the day, leaking hot steam into the walls. If Chris did not fix it, the wall would get too hot and might crack. He wiped his face with a rag. It was hard work. The tunnel was small, and he could barely move his arms. The air smelled like oil and old dust. He twisted a large bolt with his wrench. The metal was hot to the touch, but he did not mind. He liked the feeling of solving a problem. Just as he finished tightening the bolt, he heard a sound. It was not the sound of machines. It was voices. The service tunnels were right behind the main living room wall. There was a vent grate near Chris's head. The sound carried easily through the thin metal. Chris stopped working. He held his breath and listened. He recognized the voices. It was Illyra and her mother, Mara. They were in the living room, probably sitting near the fireplace. "I am so nervous about tomorrow, Mother," Illyra said. Her voice sounded high and worried. "The High Council members are very strict. If the party is not perfect, they will laugh at us." "Do not worry, my daughter," Mara answered. Her voice was calm and cold. "The house looks beautiful. The new lights are bright. The food is prepared. It will be perfect. We are the best family in the spire. There was a pause. Chris could hear the soft clinking of glasses. They were drinking something. But mother, Ilora said again. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but in the quiet tunnel, Chris could hear her clearly. I am worried about him. About the human. Chris frowned. He stayed very still. He turned off his flashlight so the light would not show through the vent. He lay in the dark, listening. Which human? Mara asked. We have many workers. Chris, of course, Ilora said, and she made a sound of disgust, like she had tasted something bad. He is so rough. I saw him today carrying those heavy boxes. His arms were big, and he was sweating. It is not nice to look at. And his smell. It is like metal and hard work. It ruins the fresh air of the room. Mara laughed softly. It was not a kind laugh. He is just a worker, Ilora. They are all like that. Humans are built for labor. They are strong and durable. That is why we hire them. They can do the dirty jobs that we are too delicate to do. I know, Ilora said impatiently. But does he have to be here during the party? The guests will see him. Council member Zor is coming. He hates lower species. He thinks humans are just tools, like hammers. If he sees Chris walking around in his dirty gray suit, he will think we are poor. He will think we cannot afford proper robots. Chris felt a cold feeling in his stomach. He had worked for this family for 3 years. He had fixed their roof when the storms came. He had saved their air system when it froze. He had even found Mara's lost ring in the waste disposal unit once. He thought they respected him, in their own way. But now he heard the truth. To them, he was just a tool. And a tool that was ugly to look at. Do not worry, Mara said soothingly. I have a plan. He is useful right now because he knows the old machines. The new robots are not smart enough to fix the legacy systems yet. But tomorrow, after the party is over, we will not need him so much. What will you do? Ilora asked. I have already spoken to the housing authority, Mara said. We will wait until the festival is over. We do not want him to mess up the preparations. But as soon as the last guest leaves, we will cancel his contract. We will say he broke something. We will take back his housing pass. Chris gripped his wrench tightly. His knuckles turned white. Really? Ilora sounded happy. We will kick him out right after Christmas even though he fixed the lights. Of course, Mara said. We will kick him out after the festival. We will keep his deposit money, of course. It will pay for the cleaning crew to remove his smell from the servant quarters. Then we can hire a shiny new droid. It will look much better in the corner. You are so smart, mother, Ilora giggled. I hate seeing his face. It is so hairy and plain. It reminds me that we live on a dirty planet. Hush now, Mara said. Let us enjoy the silence. Tomorrow will be a great day. Their voices faded away as they moved to another part of the room, perhaps to the balcony. Chris lay in the dark tunnel for a long time. He did not move. The anger was burning inside him, hotter than the steam pipes next to him. He thought about the last 3 years. He remembered working through the night when the gravity generator failed. If he had not fixed it, the whole house would have crushed them. He remembered crawling through the freezing vents to fix the heat during the winter storm. His hands had been so cold he could barely feel them, but he did it because Mara promised him a permanent home. Now he knew the truth. They did not care. They were not thankful. They were arrogant. They thought they were better than him because they were tall and thin and could float in the air. But Chris knew something they did not know. He knew that their fancy world was very fragile. Chris sat up and turned his flashlight back on. He looked at the maze of wires and pipes around him. This was the nervous system of the house. Illyra and Mara knew how to press buttons to make the lights turn on. They knew how to use their minds to move a cup. But they did not know how this machine worked. They thought the house ran on magic. They thought the air just stayed fresh by itself. They thought the gravity was natural. But it was not natural. It was a complex system of physics and engineering. And only Chris knew how to keep it balanced. He looked at the thermal coupling he had just fixed. "If I leave," he whispered to himself, "you will break again in 2 days." He realized that he did not have to wait for them to kick him out. He could leave now. But that would be too easy. If he just left, they would call a repair company, and another human would come and fix it. They would forget about Chris. No, Chris thought. He needed to make sure they remembered. He needed to make sure they understood what happens when you treat the person who holds your life in his hands like trash. He picked up his tool bag. He climbed out of the tunnel and into the main service corridor. He walked silently to the main control room. This room was in the basement, locked with a heavy door. Only Chris had the key. Inside, the walls were covered in screens. They showed the temperature of every room, the air quality, the power levels, and the water pressure. Everything in the house was controlled from here. Chris sat in the chair. He looked at the screens. Everything was green. Everything was perfect. "Kick me out," he whispered. "You want to throw me away like old garbage." He typed on the keyboard. He opened the system logs. He saw that Mara had already put a note in the calendar for the day after the festival: "Terminate human contract." Chris smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a human who had been pushed too far. "Okay, Illyra," he said quietly. "You want a perfect party? I will give you a perfect party. I will make sure the lights are bright. I will make sure the music plays. I will make sure everything is wonderful until the very last moment." He created a new file on the computer. It was a simple program. He named it Gift. "Because tomorrow is the Festival of Lights," Chris said. "And we must give gifts." He worked for an hour. He did not break anything. Breaking things would be easy. He did something better. He changed the settings. He locked the controls. He set up a timer. When he was done, he packed his personal things into a small bag. He had not many things. Just some clothes, a picture of his parents, and a few books. He took his personal data pad and wiped his fingerprints from the keyboards. He looked around the control room one last time. This was his kingdom. He had taken care of it like a baby. Now, he was letting it go. Chris walked out of the room and locked the door. He did not go to his room in the servant quarters. He did not go to sleep. He walked to the small cargo elevator that the staff used. He went up to the roof. The night air was cold. The festival would start in 12 hours. The sun would rise soon. He stood on the edge of the roof, looking at the city lights. He felt free. He was not a servant anymore. He was a man with a plan. "Merry Christmas, Illyra," Chris said into the wind. "Enjoy your party." The sun went down behind the mountains, and the sky turned a deep, dark blue. The Festival of Lights had begun. All over the city, bright fireworks exploded in the sky, painting the clouds with colors of pink, green, and gold. But inside the crystal spire, the real celebration was just starting. The huge penthouse was full of guests. They were the most important people in the colony. Members of the High Council, rich traders, and famous artists. They were all Etherians. They floated through the rooms, their long robes flowing behind them like water. The room was filled with the sound of soft, high-pitched music and the tinkling of crystal glasses. The air smelled of sweet alien flowers and expensive perfumes. In the center of the room, a large holographic tree glowed with changing colors. It was beautiful, but it was cold. There was no warmth in it, only technology. Illyra stood near the holographic tree. She looked breathtaking. Her silver dress sparkled under the lights, and her skin glowed with a special cream she had applied. She laughed at a joke made by Counselor Zor, a very old and very powerful alien. He was thin as a stick and had a long, gray beard. He did not walk, he hovered on a small anti-gravity disc. "This is a wonderful party, Illyra," Counselor Zor said, his voice sounding like dry leaves. "Your house is very modern. The air quality is excellent. I do not smell the outside world at all." "Thank you, Counselor," Illyra said, bowing her head slightly. She felt very proud. "We try to keep our home pure. We do not like dirt or noise." Mara joined them. She looked like a queen. She floated closer to Illyra and touched her arm. "Yes, we believe in perfection," Mara said. "We have the best machines. Everything runs smoothly. We do not have to worry about malfunctions." She looked around the room, searching for something. Finally, she spotted a group of human waiters standing in the corner. They wore white masks over their faces and white gloves. The masks covered their eyes and noses. Illyra had ordered the masks because she did not want to see ugly human expressions while she ate. "Bring the nectar," Mara snapped her fingers at one of the waiters. The masked waiter quickly walked over with a tray. He did not look up. He kept his eyes on the floor. He offered the drinks to the aliens. Counselor Zor took a glass and looked at the waiter with disgust. "Servants," Zor said, shaking his head. "So clumsy. I prefer robots myself. Robots do not breathe. Robots do not have that smell. They are cheaper than robots," Illyra said, laughing again. "And they are good for carrying heavy things. But you are right, they are not pleasant to be around." The guests laughed softly. It was a cruel laugh. They thought they were better than everyone else. They floated in their high tower, looking down on the world, thinking they were the masters of everything. Suddenly, the heavy door to the service corridor opened. It made a loud thud that silenced the music. The room went quiet. Everyone turned to look. A man walked in. He was not wearing a white mask. He was not wearing a waiter's uniform. He was wearing a heavy, dark industrial suit. It was an exosuit. Metal plates covered his chest and arms. He wore thick black boots that made a loud clank with every step on the perfect white floor. On his back, he carried a large, black duffel bag that looked heavy. It was Chris. He walked into the center of the room. He did not look at the guests. He did not look at the floor. He looked straight at Illyra. His face was calm, but his eyes were hard. Illyra's face turned pale. She floated lower, her feet touching the ground for the first time that night. "Chris," she gasped. "What are you doing? Why are you dressed like that? You look like a miner. You are ruining the mood. Get out. Go back to the kitchen." The guests whispered to each other. They pointed at his dirty boots. They were shocked that a worker would come into the main party. Chris stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the expensive rug. He ignored her shouting. He slowly took off his heavy work gloves and put them in his pocket. "I am not going to the kitchen, Ilora," Chris said. His voice was deep and loud. It echoed in the quiet room. "How dare you speak my name?" Ilora screamed. Her face turned red with anger. "Mother, make him leave. He is frightening the guests." Mara floated forward. She looked very angry. "Chris, you are breaking your contract. You are being rude. You will leave this house immediately, and you will not receive your pay for this week." Chris looked at Mara. He smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. "I am leaving, Mara. Don't worry. Then go." Mara pointed a long finger at the door. "We will discuss your punishment tomorrow. You will be lucky if I do not report you to the labor guild." Chris shook his head. "No. There will be no discussion tomorrow. I am leaving for good. I quit." Ilora let out a small laugh. "You can't quit. You have a contract. You belong to the house until we say you can go." Chris looked around the room at the floating aliens. He looked at the hidden cameras in the corners. He knew they were recording this. "I don't belong to anyone, Ilora. I am a free man. And I am done fixing your messes." Counselor Zor floated forward, looking down his nose at Chris. "This is very boring. Who is this primitive security? Remove him." "There is no security," Chris said calmly. "I turned off the security drones 2 hours ago." The room went even quieter. The aliens looked at each other, confused. They realized that the silent, watching eyes in the corners of the ceiling were dark. "What are you talking about?" Mara asked, her voice shaking a little. She looked at the lights. The lights were still shining. The music had stopped, but the holographic tree was still glowing. "The house is fine. You are crazy." Chris reached into his pocket and pulled out a small tablet. He tapped the screen once, then put it away. "The house is fine right now," Chris said. "I made sure of that. I tuned the gravity generators perfectly. I balanced the heat sinks. The power cells are at 100%. So why are you telling us this?" Ilora shouted. She was getting scared now. Chris was too calm. He was not acting like a servant who was in trouble. He was acting like a man who held all the cards. "I am telling you this because you wanted everything to be perfect for the party," Chris said. He adjusted the strap of his heavy bag. "And I am a professional. I did my job. The systems are running autonomously. That means they are running by themselves." He walked toward the main door. The guests moved out of his way. They did not want to touch his dirty suit. "Where are you going?" Ilora asked, her voice small. "I told you," Chris said, his hand on the door handle. "I am leaving. The house is set to run on automatic mode. It will stay perfect for about 3 hours. Maybe 4 if you don't open the balcony doors." 3 hours? Mara asked. "Then what happens?" Chris looked at her over his shoulder. "Then, the system crashes. You see, Ilora, you wanted to kick me out after Christmas. You wanted to throw me away like trash. But you forgot one thing. Trash doesn't know how the machine works." Chris opened the heavy door. The wind from the hallway blew into the room, making the holographic tree flicker for a second. "You can't leave us here with a broken house," Ilora cried out. She floated toward him, her hands reaching out. Fix it? You have to fix it? Chris shook his head. No, I don't have to do anything anymore. Read the manual, Illyra. Oh, wait. I wrote the manual. And I took it with me. He stepped out into the hallway. The aliens inside the room stood frozen. They did not understand. They were so used to things just working. They could not imagine that their comfort depended on one sweaty human. Chris turned around to face them one last time. He looked at their pale, shocked faces. He looked at their beautiful, fragile bodies. Merry Christmas, Illyra. Enjoy the party. With a loud click, Chris locked the door from the outside. Inside the room, Illyra ran to the glass wall. She pounded on it with her small fists. Let us out? Chris. Come back. But Chris did not come back. He walked down the long hallway toward the elevator. He could hear the muffled shouting through the heavy door. He pressed the button for the ground floor. As the elevator doors opened, he took a deep breath. The air out here smelled stale, but it was free. He was done being the backbone. He was done being invisible. Now, they would see exactly how much weight he was carrying. The heavy metal door clicked shut, and the sound echoed through the silent apartment like a gunshot. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Illyra stood with her hands still reaching out, her fingers pressed against the cold glass of the window. She watched the spot where Chris had been standing, but he was gone. Did he just lock us in? Counselor Zor asked. His voice was high and squeaky. He floated closer to the door, hovering just above the floor. Open this door immediately. I demand it. Illyra turned around, her face bright red. She tried to look strong in front of her guests. It is a mistake, she said, though her voice was shaking. The human is confused. He is having a mental breakdown. I will call the house control system and have him removed. She closed her eyes and focused her mind. Etherians could connect to smart machines using their thoughts. She reached out to the house computer. Unlock the front door, she thought. Call security. Nothing happened. She opened her eyes. The room was still the same. The holographic tree was still glowing. The door was still locked. Mother Illyra asked, looking at Mara. Mara looked worried. She floated over to the wall panel near the kitchen. She pressed the physical buttons with her long fingers. Computer, she said out loud. Override command Alpha 1. Open main entrance. A small light on the panel turned red. A robotic voice filled the room, but it was not the normal polite voice. It sounded flat and cold. Access denied. System is in maintenance mode. Biometric signature required, Administrator Chris. The room went dead silent. The guests stopped their whispering. They all looked at each other with wide eyes. Administrator Chris. Counselor Zor laughed, but it was a nervous sound. That cannot be right. A human is the administrator. You gave a primitive animal control over your house. Mara's face turned pale. We did not give it to him. He just took it. He set it up when we moved in. We did not think it mattered. He said it was for safety. Well, unsafe it? Zor shouted. I am leaving. This is ridiculous. He floated toward the balcony door. I will go out through the balcony and fly down to the landing pad. As he touched the button to open the balcony glass, the lights in the room flickered. For a moment, everything went dark. Then the lights came back, but they were dim. The soft, warm white light turned to a harsh, emergency blue color. A low humming sound started to come from the walls. It was a sound that none of them had heard before. It was the sound of machines struggling. Suddenly, the gravity stabilizers spiked. The gravity in the room increased instantly. "AHH!" screamed one of the guests. Zor was not ready for the weight. He crashed to the floor. He was not used to supporting his own body weight. His legs were weak. He fell onto the white stone floor, his gold crumpling under him. Illyra and Mara also fell. They landed hard on their hands and knees. The gravity was normal for a human, maybe even a bit light, but for the Etherians, it felt like being crushed by a heavy rock. They were used to floating and using their minds. Their bones were thin. Gravity hurt them. "Get it off! Get it off!" Illyra cried, trying to stand up, but she was too weak. She crawled across the floor, her expensive silver dress dragging in the dust. "The stabilizers!" Mara yelled, struggling to breathe. "The gravity is unbalanced." "Illyra, stop the machines." "I can't." Illyra sobbed. "The computer won't listen to me." The emergency blue lights started to flash on and off. Flash. 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 And then, the temperature began to drop. The crystal spire was high in the atmosphere. Outside, the air was freezing cold. The heating system, which Chris had maintained so carefully, shut down completely. Within minutes, the beautiful warm room turned into an icebox. The guests were shivering. They huddled together on the floor. Their fancy robes and thin dresses gave them no warmth. They were tropical creatures, they hated the cold. "We have to get out of here," Counselor Zor said, his teeth chattering. He looked pathetic crawling on the floor. "We will freeze to death in here." Mara pointed a shaking finger at a small panel near the floor. That is the manual release for the door. I have seen Chris use it." "Then use it," Zor shouted. "I cannot," Mara cried. "It is too tight. My fingers do not fit. You need strong hands to turn it." Illyra looked at the panel. It was a small wheel, made of rough metal. It was rusted a little bit. To open it, you had to grab it and pull hard, then twist. It was designed for a human grip. It was impossible for small, delicate alien hands. "Let me try," Illyra said. She crawled over to the wall. She grabbed the wheel with both hands. She pulled. The wheel did not move. It was stuck tight from years of not being used. "It is stuck!" she screamed. She kicked the wall with her foot, but she only hurt her toes. "Do not break the wall!" Mara yelled. "That is structural glass." The room was getting colder by the minute. The hum of the machines was getting louder, turning into a low groan. The house was falling apart without its master. The air filters stopped, making the air feel stale and heavy. "We have to go to the lower levels," Illyra said suddenly. "The servant quarters. The basement. Chris has a room there. Maybe he has a tool. Maybe he has a manual code written down." "The basement." Zor made a face of disgust. "It is dirty down there. It smells." "Would you rather smell dirt or freeze to death?" Mara snapped. She grabbed the arm of another guest. "Help me up. We have to walk." It was a sad and slow procession. The mighty Etherians, the rulers of the colony, had to crawl and stumble across the floor. They dragged themselves toward the service elevator. They pushed the button, but the elevator did not move. The power was being diverted to the life support in the basement. We have to take the stairs, Illyra said. She opened the door to the stairwell. It was dark and smelled of oil and metal. The steps were made of steel grids, not smooth stone. They looked down into the darkness. Go, Mara ordered. They began to climb down. It was hard work. Their legs were shaking. Every step hurt. They complained and cried, but Illyra led them on. She was angry, but she was also scared. She had never felt fear like this before. She had never been in a situation where her money and her status could not help her. When they finally reached the bottom floor, they were exhausted. The basement was hot and humid, full of large pipes and tanks. It was the complete opposite of the penthouse. It was ugly. Which one is his room? Zor asked, looking around with fear. They all looked the same. That one, Illyra said, pointing to a door with a small sign that said maintenance. She rushed to the door. She expected it to be locked, but it was not. She pushed it open and ran inside. Chris! She shouted. Are you here? But the room was empty. It was completely bare. The bed was stripped of sheets. The drawers were open and empty. There were no clothes, no tools, no books. The only thing left on the small desk was a single piece of paper. Illyra grabbed the paper. It was handwritten in thick, black pen. Illyra read it aloud, her voice trembling, to Illyra and Mara. I took my tools because they are mine. I did not leave the codes because the house is dangerous in the wrong hands. The system is locked for 3 days. After that, it will reset. But you will need to learn how to fix the coupling in the north vent yourself. Good luck. Chris. Illyra let the paper fall to the floor. He took everything. He left us here to die, Zor whispered, sinking to his knees. He left us in this metal box. Mara looked at the empty room. She looked at the grease stains on the walls. She thought about Chris's rough hands and his dirty clothes. She realized now that the dirt was not a sign of weakness. The dirt was a sign of work. He worked to keep them safe. He worked to keep them warm. And they had treated him like he was nothing. We have to go back up, Mara said quietly. Maybe the balcony will work now. They turned and trudged back up the stairs. They were cold, they were tired, and they were terrified. Above them, the house was groaning. The lights were flickering wildly. The gravity was still too heavy. They were trapped in a high-tech tomb, with no one to dig them out but themselves. As they reached the top of the stairs, the main lights went out completely. Only the red emergency lights remained, casting long, scary shadows. Illyra looked at the beautiful glass walls of her home. Now, in the red light and the cold, it did not look like a paradise. It looked like a cage. And for the first time in her life, the cage door was locked, and she was on the wrong side of it. Hours had passed since the grand festival of lights ended, but the party was truly over now. The huge penthouse was dark and quiet, but it was not peaceful. The temperature had dropped to nearly freezing. The beautiful glass walls were covered in frost. The air was thin and hard to breathe. Illyra sat on the floor of the living room. She was wrapped in 3 thick, fuzzy blankets, but she was still shivering. Her beautiful silver dress was ruined. It was stained with dust and grease, and it was torn at the hem. She looked like a mess. She huddled near the empty fireplace, rubbing her arms to keep warm. Near her, Counselor Zor was stomping around the room. He was furious. This is intolerable. He shouted, his voice echoing in the cold room. I have been here for 6 hours. My blood sugar is low. I am a High Council member. I demand food. Then go to the kitchen and get it, Illyria snapped. She was tired of his voice. She was tired of everything. Her head hurt from the cold and the stress. I tried. Zor yelled, waving his hands in the air. The food machine is locked. It keeps asking for a password. It keeps saying Administrator Chris only. I cannot eat a password. Mara sat on the floor away from the others. She was staring at the wall where the service hatch was hidden. She looked pale and weak. We made a mistake, she said quietly. Her voice was barely a whisper. Of course we made a mistake. Zor screamed. We hired a savage. No, Mara said, looking at Zor with cold eyes. We made a mistake because we thought he was nothing. We thought he was a tool. But a tool cannot work by itself. We threw away the craftsman. She looked around the dead room. No lights, no heat, no gravity control. The magic was gone. He was the one holding this all together. We were just floating on top of his hard work. Suddenly, a loud banging sound came from the front door. Bang. 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 Illyria jumped up, dropping her blankets. Help! She screamed. Is that help? The door did not open. It was locked from the outside, and Chris was gone. But someone was there. Open up! A deep, rough voice shouted through the metal. We know you're in there. We can't. Illyria screamed back, running to the door. The lock is broken. It is electronic. Stand back. The voice yelled. There was a loud crunch sound. Sparks flew from the door handle. Someone was using a cutting torch on the other side. It took a few minutes, but finally, the heavy metal lock melted, and the door fell inward with a loud crash. Standing in the doorway were 3 large humans. They were not dressed like Chris. They wore bright orange coveralls with thick black boots. They were bigger than Chris, with thick beards and tattoos on their arms. They carried heavy tool belts filled with wrenches and hammers. The name on their chests said Galactic Repair Squad. The leader of the group stepped into the room. He looked around at the shivering aliens, the dirty floor, and the cold frost on the windows. He did not look impressed. He did not bow. He did not float. Who called for a mechanic? The man asked. He looked at a dirty tablet in his hand. We did. Zor floated forward, looking relieved. Finally. A civilized person. Get this machine working immediately. And bring me some hot water. I am freezing. The big man laughed. It was a loud, barking laugh. Civilized buddy, I'm here to fix the server, not serve tea. And it's going to cost you money, Mara asked, floating closer. She was shaking. We can pay. We are rich. Just fix the house. The man shook his head. Oh, no. You don't understand. We know who you are. You're the Etherians from Penthouse A. We heard what happened. You fired your sysadmin. That was Chris, right? He quit. Illyria yelled. He left us in the dark. The repairman looked at her with hard eyes. Chris is a good guy. He used to work with us on the docks years ago. He told us you treat your help like trash. So, this isn't a normal service call. This is an emergency override. The price is 50,000 credits. Up front. 50,000, Zor gasped. That is robbery. That is more than the house costs. Take it or leave it, the man said, turning around. We can just walk away. You can sit here and freeze. It doesn't matter to me. My crew is happy to go back to the bar. Wait. Mara shouted. She grabbed the man's arm. He was hard as a rock. She looked at her shivering daughter. She looked at the fear in the room. We will pay. Transfer the funds. The man nodded. Good. Get out of the way. This is going to get messy. For the next hour, the humans did not use their minds. They did not use polite words. They used hammers, wrenches, and blowtorches. They banged on the walls. They cut through panels. They shouted commands at each other. It was loud, hot, and violent. Illyra and Mara huddled in the corner, covering their ears. It was chaos to them, but to the humans, it was the sound of work. Finally, the main lights flickered and turned on. The soft hum of the air system returned. The heater kicked in, blowing warm air into the room. The frost on the windows began to melt. Done, the big man said, wiping black grease from his hands onto a rag. I reset the system. But listen to me. This house is old. You need a full-time guy to watch the couplings. If you don't hire a human, this will happen again. And next time, we might charge double. He turned and walked out the door. The other men followed. They did not say goodbye. They just left, taking their money and their noise with them. Mara sat down on the floor, exhausted. She looked at Illyra. Illyra was crying softly. I want Chris back, she whispered. It was warm when he was here. It is too late, Mara said sadly. He is gone. And we are alone in a pile of glass and wire. Hundreds of miles away, the huge cargo ship the Iron Giant was leaving the atmosphere. The engines roared with power, shaking the metal floors. It was a rough ship, built for hauling heavy ore across the stars. It was not pretty like the Crystal Spire. Chris stood on the bridge, looking out the massive window at the deep black space. The ship was a place for workers. The walls were painted gray, and the air smelled of fuel and strong coffee. But to Chris, it felt like home. It felt honest. Next to him stood Captain Miller, a big woman with gray hair and a confident smile. She was looking at a screen full of maps. So, Chris, Captain Miller said. Glad to have you aboard. We needed someone who understands legacy systems. Most of the young kids these days just know how to push buttons. They don't know how to fix things with their hands. Chris smiled. I like using my hands, Captain. It feels good to make something work. I like to see the result. I heard about the mess you left at the Spire, Miller said, laughing. You locked the fancy aliens in their own house. They needed a lesson, Chris said calmly. They forgot that comfort is something you build, not something you own. They thought the house was magic. They forgot that magic is just hard work that you can't see. Well, they are screaming about it on the news right now, Miller said. Saying humans are dangerous and ungrateful. Chris looked out the window as the ship passed the moon. He could see the tiny sparkle of the city lights where the spire was. He didn't feel angry anymore. He just felt free. They can say whatever they want, Chris said softly. We are the ones flying among the stars. We are the ones keeping the machines alive. They just sit in their glass boxes, waiting for someone to turn on the lights. The ship accelerated, pushing Chris back against his seat. They were heading out to the edge of the galaxy, to places where there were no servants and no masters. Just humans and the wild universe. Back in the spire, Illyra walked slowly to the window. She watched the trail of fire in the sky as the ship left the atmosphere. She wrapped her blanket tighter around her shoulders. The heater was working now, and the room was getting warm, but she still felt cold. She felt empty. She looked at the spot where Chris used to stand. She remembered him wiping his sweat. She remembered him asking if the air was okay. She realized that the house was never perfect because of the machines, it was perfect because of him. He was the one who made it a home. She looked at the empty room. The beautiful furniture, the expensive art, the smart technology, it was all just stuff. Without the human to care for it, it was just a cold shell. "Goodbye, Chris," she whispered. She turned away from the window and went to sit by the fire. She had her house back, but she knew she would never feel safe again. She had learned the most important rule of the universe: never break the hands that hold you up. As the Iron Giant sped away into the dark, vast space, Chris relaxed in his chair. He closed his eyes and listened to the hum of the ship. It was a sound that no Etherean could understand, a sound of power and grit. He had given them exactly what they wanted, a house without a human. They wanted the house without the human. They got exactly what they asked for.